I realized I've been the one interviewing people my whole life. I've never done that work to extricate the stories from myself so that I could go tell my story to magnetize the people to me. I felt all the resistance about putting myself on social media every single day, from a mental barrier to feeling awkward to feeling overexposed to pushing myself to tell more real stories.
Welcome to another edition of the S.H.E podcast. Be seen, be heard, be empowered. And I'm excited to rock and roll with an amazing guest that I have on today. I met her through a connection that I made with someone else, and we had an awesome conversation. And of course, I invited her to be here to join us because I know that she has a powerful story to share with you and a lot of advice and expertise to share with you as well when it comes to building your business. So welcome, Adams Pertuis, to the show. Hi, April.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi. So fun to be here. I
I'm
appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. I'm excited to dive in with you. Before we start, I'm just going to give everyone a little background about you. So Adams
Okay.
Pertuis is a dynamic force in the world of storytelling and visibility, empowering mission-driven female entrepreneurs and business leaders to leverage the strength of their story to create more connection, build community, and increase deal flow. As the visionary founder and CEO of Light Beamers, April pioneers the way for women to use their stories as a catalyst for growth. When April speaks, audiences discover the power of their own story to create more cohesive communities, build strong relationships, and attract ideal outcomes. The key message is always everybody has a story, and that story is a powerful beacon used to shine a light for others. I love what you do and how you help people, April, because I'm all about visibility, being seen. That's the name.
Yeah.
It's the name of this podcast. So it's a perfect. I'm really excited to be chatting with you today about this. So my question for you is, and I usually ask all my women that come on here, you're all about storytelling. So I would love to hear your story. And was this journey of building your business with Light Beamers, is this something that you overcame a challenge yourself when it came to sharing your story or being visible, or is this something that you were just gifted with and now you help others?
Oh, I love this question. And the answer is kind of interesting, actually, because, I have a background in the media. I started my career as a television journalist, and I have been, very comfortable, if you will, in the public eye and putting myself out there and being seen and visible.
Mm.
And I'm very, very comfortable with storytelling. Primarily, though, my role for many, many years was to go and pull the story out of other people, right? Like as a journalist, as an interviewer, as a documentarian, right? Those were the things that I was doing. And so I had this idea for Light Beamers that had been kind of rolling around in my mind for like these things happen. It doesn't happen overnight. It had been happening for a while. And it was during a time in my career specifically that I felt like I had done a lot. I've done a lot of things that were very satisfying, very exciting. I had been in my career for about 25 years at this point, almost 25 years. And I was at a stage where I was like, this is great, but I feel like there's more in me that I'm not actually tapping and reaching my potential. And so I was in a state of seeking and honestly prayer and asking God to show me, like, I can't seem to quite figure out what that potential is, but I do sense that there's more of me. And I think there's more that I could be doing with my career than what I'm actually doing. But I don't really know what that is. So I need a little help with some ideas. So that is really when Light Beamers started forming in my head. And I always say, I, kind of like divinely created this, co-created this with God, because he answered that prayer, and he started dripping me these glimpses into the future of what this could look like in terms of Light Beamers. And I just thought, I have this knowledge around how to tell people stories. And I see so many people, and this was definitely, looking at social media and seeing people trying to put themselves out there. And I thought, gosh, there's a lot of ways that people are kind of bungling up telling their story. They're not really getting to the heart of it. And I think I could help them. And this would be a lot more interesting than just waiting for someone to get sent someone like me to their doorstep to interview them. Like, don't wait for that to happen. Why don't I just teach you how to tell your story on your own? You don't need someone like me to come do it for you. So that was really the idea for Light Beamers. And then the very next question was like, well, okay, how am I going to grow this? I had no audience. I was literally a behind the scenes girl for most of my career, other than the time that I was on television. And so I didn't have a following. People didn't know who I was. I'm not a household name, so how am I going to grow this? And I knew that I was going to do it on social media. I just saw the beauty. There's a lot of things about social media that we all don't like, but the beautiful part about social media is that it's an open, free media source, right? It's an open source platform that is free for all of us to use. And there's a lot of us that use it well, and there's a lot of us that don't use it well. I thought, well, I can teach people how to use it well. So I knew I was going to build on social media, but I didn't know the first thing about digital marketing or any of those things. But what I did know was, well, I know the power of storytelling. And so my big idea was, I'm just going to get on social media every day. And at that time, it was literally just Facebook. It was the only platform that I was even on at the time. I'm just going to get on Facebook every day, and I'm going to practice telling my story, and I'm going to magnetize people to me. Now that sounds very egotistical, but I really know that that's actually how it works, right? Like that really is simplistically how it kind of works. The problem was, and there was my expertise. There was what I was already good at. That's the stuff I knew how to do. Here's where I ran into my own resistance. I realized I've been the one interviewing people my whole life. I've never done that work to extricate the stories from myself so that I could go tell my story to magnetize the people to me. So I became my own client, right? I'm like, wow, if I'm going to teach other people how to extricate the story from themselves, I got to do this for me. And let me tell you, it was actually hard. I fumbled my way through it. I felt all the resistance about putting myself on social media every single day, like I promised I was going to do. And all the things came up for me, from a mental barrier to feeling awkward to feeling overexposed to pushing myself to tell more real stories. And at first, I fully admit that my stories were pretty bland and pretty vanilla. They were pretty safe, right? I was going the safe route. And that worked a little bit, but it really wasn't until I just was like, okay, April, you know what you need to do. Now go do it. I started to push myself to tell more vulnerable, real, authentic stories, which are so much harder to tell because, again, it does feel very exposing and revealing to some of the things that I'm not an expert in, that I'm not the best at. And so that was actually when things started to roll in much faster, is when I pushed myself to do those things. Now, I just told that story very succinctly, and it made it sound like that happened very easily for me. This took about 2 years.
Okay.
It really took about 2 years for me to kind of figure it out and get comfortable and get my feet wet, and really for me to start to see momentum. Now, that's not to say that it takes my clients 2 years, because I really want to try to shortcut that process for them. And I think that, we're able to do that. But I was really, I took my time with it. And looking back on it, it was kind of a sweet 2 years, honestly. I built this really beautiful community. I have this really amazing community called the Light Beamers community. I have all these women who are in our world. Some of them have become amazing clients, and some of them hang out and they take all of our free stuff. And I love them just as much. It's part of the ecosystem that we have built at Light Beamers. And I've gotten to know these women, and I've heard their stories now. And so I'm really grateful for that foundational time that I had. But that's the story of what it looked like in the beginning for me.
There's so many good things that you talked about right there that I want to unpack and break down. The first thing was that you shared at the beginning of your story was that you paused and you asked God, like you knew there was something more for you. And I think with entrepreneurship, that's the entrepreneurs know there's a calling, there's something that's pulling on them, and it doesn't stop until you answer the call. And you had this, there's more for me. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but I know this isn't the end of my journey here. This isn't where I'm staying. I get to move into something different. and you're going to ask for support and just let it flow to you. I did a live stream today talking about live streams around exactly that. Yesterday was my birthday when we're recording this. I'm reflecting this week on everything in the past year and also the last few years. And what you shared is powerful because it's exactly what I said. My biggest takeaway that I learned, and I actually learned it in 2022 with this podcast, with creating this podcast, is to trust. Trust that everything is happening for me. Don't push. Don't try to put a square peg into a round hole. Because when we do that, we're pushing forward on something that isn't aligned with us. And you were like, you needed alignment. And you're like, what does that look like? And then light beamers showed up for you and you created this. And you enjoyed the journey. So many of us are pushing to get from our chapter 1 to our chapter 30 because we're looking at people. And you're actually going to slow you down when you do that. So if you enjoy the journey, and you said perfectly, not that your clients take 2 years, it's slower for us because we're in it. And then once we learn what works and what doesn't work, then we can create that program, that system to teach others how to do it. But also as a mentor, and I love that you said, it was a sweet journey. Like, enjoy the journey. It's a journey, and your journey is going to be different than April's. Your journey is going to be different than mine. And that's great. But don't compare your chapter 5 to somebody else's chapter 50, because enjoy that path that you're going, because their path is their path and your path is your path. Another thing you shared. So I love that you shared, like you listened, you waited until you were in alignment. You listened to your intuition, your inner voice, and it showed up for you. And that's one thing with this podcast. I was like, it was going to be a completely different name, geared toward mompreneurs. And we were going forward because I was pushing, because I had this goal, had to be done in 2022. November came. I didn't know when that was going to show up. And I'm like, oh, we got to get it done by December 30th. We've got to launch. I have this goal, right? And I just wasn't aligned with the name. We were pushing forward. And I said, you know what? I'm not doing this. I'm going to wait. So I called my producer. I said, we're going to push this off. In New York around New Year's Eve, I woke up in the middle of I woke up in the hotel room and I was like, be seen, be heard, be empowered. And I messaged my producer and I'm like, this is where we're going. And she's like, I love that. Had I pushed, I don't even think we'd have a podcast right now, because
you probably wouldn't still be doing it. Absolutely.
No. So I love that you shared that. And I want to break down your story.
Congrats on that to you as well. I love it.
Thank you. And that's a big lesson that you shared too. Like, I love that you shared that in your story, because I was like, I just talked about that today. What an alignment this is. And
totally.
perfect timing. So I'm just, for those of you listening, and I'm going to get back to asking you questions, but that was one of, like, so powerful that you shared, because it's just, alignment is key. And I love that we're talking about this today, and on my live stream, I just did it. So my next question for you is, what was the biggest challenge for you when you started your business? And I want to get more into breaking down storytelling too, and like some tips that you can share with our audience. But first, I want to talk about your biggest challenge.
In the beginning, the biggest challenge for me was actually figuring out how to monetize what I was doing, because you named it earlier. I did feel like this was a calling. I felt the urge. That question about, I think I've got more of me to give, was again coming from somewhere else. It wasn't me, but it was me, right? And so I did feel that what I was doing with light beamers was, number one, bigger than me, and it's way bigger than me. And number two, I didn't feel compelled at first to monetize it. I felt more of it being a service to others, because I have this knowledge, and I do have a passion around storytelling, a big one, because I've been doing this work for over 30 years now. You don't do something for 30 years because you don't like it.
Right.
I've done this because I love it, and it energizes me and it fuels me. And so I get a lot out of it all by itself. And so I wasn't in a rush. And again, this is not like business 101 for anyone, because I wouldn't encourage this, but the truth be, I wasn't in a rush to try to figure out how to monetize this. And I remember very specifically when I first had the idea for light beamers, and I could see so clearly what it was. And at first I was writing a blog, and I was just sharing my stories. That was literally all it was. I remember someone very close to me, a good friend of mine, that I shared my excitement and I shared my idea, and she looked at me and she said, but how are you going to make money? And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make money. That is like not even what I'm worried about. So the first struggle for me was actually answering that question. And the way that I finally solved that problem, was because I had been showing up. I was consistent. I was in front of my audience. I was growing my audience. I was growing my community, and I wasn't asking for anything in exchange. Eventually, people did start like basically knocking my door down and was like, for the love of God, will you please show us and teach us what you're
Make an
talking about?
offer. They're like, make us an
Yes,
offer.
make an offer. And so I was like, oh, yeah, of course, And so that was really how, I started then figuring out. And this is where I had coaching because I didn't know anything about digital marketing and I didn't know anything about how to put a program together. So I had some great coaching and I had help and I put some offers together and we've been selling stuff ever since. And Light Beamers, in as the time of this recording, we are 9.5 years old. So I have been in business now, making money on my own as an entrepreneur. It's amazing, for 9.5 years. But that didn't come overnight. It came again with a little bit of patience and a lot of listening. And actually, that's a storytelling tip for everybody. Really great storytellers are very in tune and they are listening. And listening is also like awareness, paying attention to what's around you, paying attention to what your community is saying to you, paying attention to where they're struggling, paying attention to what they're not saying, but how they're showing up. And I paid attention and I was in deep conversation with a lot of women in my community, probing them and asking them and encouraging them. And that's when they were like, but I don't know how. And I was like, no problem. I'll teach you how. And then we were off to the races. But, I was a good listener and that's, the sign of a good storyteller anyway. And I was aware and I was open, I was open to be guided and I didn't have it all figured out. I see so many women leaders who were waiting to have it all figured out before they just launch. You're not going to have it all figured out. I had nothing figured out. In my business today, the programs that we offer and the things that we're doing today, 9.5 years later, are night and day difference to what it looked like when I started. The things that those first few offerings and programs that I offered, they're extinct. I don't even offer them anymore. But my business has grown and I've evolved as a leader and as a mentor and a teacher and a guide and a coach, whatever you want to call it, right? That our business has grown and it looks a lot different today. But if I had waited, and I feel like we're in a really good spot today and I love what we're doing. If I had waited for this to arrive, I'd probably still be waiting, right? I don't think you get there from waiting for it to be perfect. You get there by actually taking action and figuring it out as you go along. Yeah. Nobody has the roadmap, including you. And including your coach and including some online course that you're taking right now. Right. It really is, you have to be in the journey. You have to like be there and figure it out on the way. And you have to be willing to fail. Yes. And failure is just a sign of success on its way. I mean, it's information. And so I just see so many women waiting and I share my story that way because I don't want you to wait. I really, really want you to learn from these stories that I'm sharing because, that was the key, is that I just got into action.
Yeah. Well, that's so good. There's so many things there. Action brings clarity. I say that all the time.
Yes.
You're going to know by taking, you're going to know that by taking action, what direction to go from that after that step. You can't get to step 10 without taking the first step. You've been in business for 9.5 years. And the reason you have was because you were willing to fail and you're willing to take action and go, okay, that didn't work. That did. Let's keep doing that. And let's tweak this. Right. And so 9.5 years, most entrepreneurs fail. They stop and they quit. It's not even failing. All entrepreneurs fail. We all fail.
I want to quit every single day. I mean, there are days that I literally had this thought yesterday. I'm like, there's not a day that goes by as an entrepreneur and as a successful business owner. I mean, by all accounts, I'm successful. I'm laughing and kind of rolling my eyes as I'm saying that, but I am on paper, right? But there are days like yesterday, I'm like, oh, maybe I should just go get a job, like every day. There are things, because entrepreneurship is not easy and it is lonely. And there's a lot of things that everyone online wants to make it sound so easy and beautiful and great. And it is beautiful and it is great, but I don't think it's easy. And so you have to be willing to fall down. You have to be willing to learn. Yeah. you have to be willing to you kind of have to have a figure it out kind of attitude. If you're the type of person that has been used to just taking orders from someone else your entire life and doing those things that other people tell you to do, and you're satisfied with that, entrepreneurship is not going to be for you.
No.
But I was never, ever, ever satisfied with that. I lasted a very short amount of time in my career as a television journalist because I hated being told what to do. And so I was built for entrepreneurship. I didn't know it back then, but it has been a roller coaster. But yes, you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to do those things. But by no means, do we all have it figured out, even 9.5 years later? There are days that I'm like, oh, I suck at this. I'm the worst ever. It's all going to go in a ball of flames tomorrow. I still have those thoughts, and I'm sure that I will have those thoughts. I try to tame them. I'm better at taming them these days, but I think that it's real. It's the truth.
Yeah. And I love that you said failure is success, because you need every successful person that you can think of has failed more than they've
Yes.
succeeded. So it's really important to get comfortable with getting uncomfortable and getting comfortable with failing, because you're failing forward, not backward. Another thing I wanted to, visibility is key. And that, I love that you shared that you didn't know how to make money, and you started really getting visible, putting yourself out there, going live, getting to know your audience. And I teach that. And so I love that you shared it, because I'm like, when you have an idea, even if you're pivoting, whether you're scaling or you're starting, doesn't matter. The offer doesn't come next. Visibility, being seen, getting attention comes next. Getting to know your audience, realizing who are you attracting to you, who's resonating, and who are you magnetizing, using the word that you shared with us. Who are you magnetizing to you? Build those relationships, ask those questions, find out where the gap is and what they've done before or tried before. Fill the gap. You don't need to worry about making the offer or creating your program first, because you spent all that time, like you said. Stop wasting time trying to get it all perfect. Be perfectly imperfect, right? Have fun with being imperfect and getting to know your audience. And that comes from showing up and being visible. So you were very comfortable being visible with your background. But when it came to sharing your story, it got a little awkward and uncomfortable. So can you share with us one of your biggest fears? Because mine was going live. I was debilitated. I bawled my eyes out luckily it was in a private group, but still there was hundreds of people in there. And you shared vulnerability, people get to know you. They thanked me for showing up that way. I was appalled and mortified. And it was due to a challenge. But since you were comfortable being visible, what was your biggest fear when you started putting yourself out there as April, and not as sharing your journey and not sharing people's journey?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think everyone does need to identify the fear and name it. I have a whole podcast episode about, you got to name the fear. Let's just get really comfortable, make that fear a best friend, name it, personify it, just link arms with it, and understand that this is just part of your journey. But fear does not have to conquer you. It gets to be a partner, but it's not a conqueror. And for me, you're right. It really wasn't about getting on. I mean, I've been on camera. I've been on, I've done live streams. I mean, I was doing live streaming before live streaming was a thing, because I did that as a news journalist. I was out live doing live reports, so I could speak extemporaneously. I was very comfortable in that regard. I wasn't all worked up about what did I look like on camera. I knew what I looked like on camera. It's what you look like in the mirror. It's no big surprise what you look like on camera, because it's how we show up every day looking. Right. But yet we take such offense to how we look on camera. And so we're making the story all about us when we do that. So I was clear about that. I had no issues there. But when I started sharing my story, like every single one of my clients, the fear is and was for me, well, what if, number one, really deep rooted is, what if nobody likes me, right? What if nobody likes me? What if they don't get it? For me, it definitely was, because I wasn't exactly really clear yet with my message. I was so figuring it out as I went along. I knew what I wanted Light Beamers to be, but I didn't know how to articulate it super clearly. I do now, but I did not then. And so I was in my head a lot going, I wish they would see what I see, and I was nervous that they weren't going to get it, and that I was going to look like a big goofball, that people were going to think that my idea was weird, or that it was stupid, or any of those things. And so that was where my nervousness came from, was less about what I look like and sound like on camera and what, all of those things, and more of, what if they don't get it? Like, what if this isn't going to land? What if I can't communicate clearly? And at the time, I couldn't. I was really struggling to communicate clearly. And like anything, the way I figured that out was putting myself out there and giving it a shot, and showing. I made myself a promise in the very early days, and it was very, very simple. Look, April, you're going to get online every day and you're going to speak to people, and that's your goal. Like, your only goal is to get online every day and speak to people. And I really made it that simple. So I just got online every day and I spoke to people, and I did live streaming. I did all things, but I created opportunities to have conversations. And sometimes I was better at that than others. But overall, because I made the commitment to do that every day, for the most part, yeah, I mean, probably 5-6 days a week, I would do that. And that is really what built. And of course, all along, I was using what I know to use, which is the power of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I was making myself real in front of my audience. I wasn't some, picture perfect person online that had the $100 million business, that was the guru that could, teach you how to go to $1 million by tomorrow. I was not that person. I'm still not that person. Actually, I don't aspire to be that person. And so I was just real. I was sharing with them, what did it look like for me to not know? Like, hey, I'm going to try this thing. I don't know if it's going to go. I don't know if you guys are going to like it, but I'm going to give it a try. And I was that honest with people. I just was sharing my journey of what it looked like for me to try to build light beamers. And I had just so many people and cheerleaders. And like I said, a lot of people that never became clients, but they became huge cheerleaders, and supporters. And those people really mattered. They would send me these random texts in the middle of the week and just like, hey, I'm thinking of you. Our brand color is yellow. And so anytime people see yellow, they will often send me a note. Like, I was thinking of you. I saw this yellow car, and so that's when I knew things were penetrating, even though like I didn't have it all figured out yet. And I'm like, something I'm doing is working. And I just got to keep going to figure out the pieces that are the things that I need to add gasoline to. But yeah, it's a fear of just, no one's going to like it. I'm not going to make sense to people. They're not going to get what I'm trying to do. They're not going to value storytelling the way I value storytelling. I'm passionate about it, but they're probably going to think it's not worth it. And a lot of people do. I still have to overcome that battle every single day. A lot of people do not value storytelling, and those are not my clients. I can try to convince them and teach them, but they have to actually believe inherently that their story does carry value and merit and worth, even if they don't, feel that in the moment, but they deep down know it. Yeah. And so those are the clients that I'm trying to reach.
Yeah. And that's a good point. We're not trying to save the world, and we're not trying to help everybody. That's why it's really important that you get visible, you share your journey, you share your story, be open and authentic. Like April was sharing, she did, and that's how she magnetized her people. And then she had conversations and she got to know them. And that is the process of what you need to be doing when it comes to entrepreneurship, no matter what stage of business you're in. Again, whether you're a beginner or scaling, you need to be able, connection is currency. And I love that you shared that you made a commitment to yourself to go live every day, to connect with people every day. And confidence grew, even though you had that fear. What if they don't like me? What if they don't resonate with me? What if they don't understand what I'm trying to put out there, right? My messaging. And every time you held that commitment that you made to yourself to connect with people every day, your confidence went up, because confidence comes from following through with the commitments that we make to ourselves.
And trust was building with my audience, because I wasn't a fly by the seat of my pants person. I mean, I wasn't a flash in the pan kind of thing. I wasn't there one day, gone the next day. I was consistent. I showed up. They could rely on me. We started doing prompts and storytelling teaching inside our free community. We still do that to this day. I don't even have to do it anymore, but we still do it. Every single week, we do the same thing we have been doing for the last almost probably about 7 years, because those prompts kind of evolved over time. And people trust that. They know that I'm not going to go anywhere now. They
Right.
believe me. They even new people that come into our world that don't know my history and weren't there in the beginning, they see the consistency. They see every week Light Beamers is going to be there and they're going to get our emails. And I'm very unapologetic. I email my people all the time. Do not get on my email list if you do not want emails, because, if you're going to get on my email list, I'm actually going to communicate with you. I actually want to be in communication with people. That's really what storytelling is a desire to share one story so that it opens up the opportunity for someone else to share theirs. I desire that. I don't desire sharing my story just so that it can be all about me. I desire sharing my story so that hopefully, this is, you and I did this when you and I met. We got on a call and we just shared each other's story. And that was how we opened up to each other and how we realized we're, like we have a lot of things in connection, and we had a lot of just really similar things that we believe, and which is evident already in this podcast recording. But in that first meeting with you, we just did that. And that's what built a connection. And now look at what's happening. You're sharing me with your audience, which is such a gift, and thank you. So that's what happens with the storytelling piece, is that you really are willing and wanting to be in connection and communication with someone else. So you're looking at your story not from the lens of, this is going to be all about me and it's my ego that gets to be on display. I want you to shift that and realize, because I have a tagline at Light Beamers: when you share your story, you shine a light. You share your story so that it can shine a light for someone else, and it may illuminate the way for them. It may help a light bulb go off in their head. It may spark a new idea. But a lot of times we need that mirrored and reflected to us first in the form of someone else's story. When I'm struggling and I have something that I don't know and I'm trying to figure out, I don't need a textbook. I need a human to tell me their story. And I seek that often. I've struggled with many things in my life, and if it's someone that maybe if I'm having an issue in my marriage, I'm going to go to a friend and say, have you ever had this issue? And tell me, how did you overcome it? I'm not going to go to a textbook on marriage. I'm going to go to people who have actually been in the arena getting their ass kicked and overcoming things and figuring it out. And that's the power of storytelling. So all of us have the ability to magnetize people to us through the power of telling our story. The challenge is getting over yourself and getting over the fear and making it all about you, because I tell my clients all the time, your story is not really about you. It's about the audience you're trying to reach.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I want to ask you about some framework or a couple steps that people can take. But you just made a really good point. Like when we let go of even if you're fearful, whether you have an ego about it, or you're scared to death to share it, it's not about you. Like you shared, like when we focus out, we can put that fear aside and go, you know what, if one person, I know I'm scared to death to tell my story, but if one person hears it and it helps them, one, that's going to help you move through the fear, and two, you're helping someone else. And that's the purpose. Same thing with selling. You talked about monetization, same thing. Selling is serving. If you're not making your offers, people are going to be like, they're either going to buy from someone that's not as gifted as you are and doesn't know and can't help them as well as you can, or they're just going to, disappear, or they're going to come to you like they did with April and go, come on, give us an offer. But most people won't do that. Most people won't. So you want to be making your offers quicker, but at the same time, visibility comes first and sharing your story comes first. So April, for somebody that's like, I want to share my story, but I flub it all the time and I feel like I'm all over the place. Is there a framework or a certain few steps they should be taking to kind of organize that for themselves?
Yes. And this framework is in everything that I do. There's a free download on my website that you can go grab and then kind of worksheet your way through it. We illustrate this all the time, every week, through those prompts that I told you about in our community. So I put this everywhere. Okay. And whether you become a client or not, this is a gift to all of you. Because when I looked at I shared, I got to figure out how to do this too. I got to figure out how to share my story in the early days of building Light Beamers. And it's like, well, I need to go back to what I've done as a career of putting the microphone in front of other people and asking them a lot of questions. And I really distilled it down to, how do I know when I have the story? How do I know when that interview is over? And it's when I have figured out these three pieces of someone's story is when I knew I had the story and that the interview was concluded. And those three pieces, very simply stated, are, and I'm going to name each one, then I'll describe. It's what I call, and these are just my names, the before, the transformation, and the other side. Now, if you look at a lot, this is basic storytelling this is nothing new that I'm teaching. This is not proprietary to me. This is just how I describe it. But if you go look at Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, anything on storytelling, you're going to come up with these three things over and over and over again. People will call them something different, but they're basically these three. It's in the framework of the Cinderella fairy tale, right? The once upon a time, then the knight in shining armor comes in, and then they live happily ever after. It's these three things. So in my framework around the before, the transformation, the other side, I visualize it like a mountain. It's a story arc. You want to take your audience up and over a journey, right? But I like to think of it as a mountain, because just visually it makes sense. So on the one side of the mountain is your before. When you look at your story as a whole, or any story that you're telling, your big story or even a small micro story, you want to look at where's the entry point, right? Where do I start telling them information about the story? Well, you need to look at some historical context. So the before is when you're standing at the bottom of the mountain before you have like any kind of revelation. And so it's usually where we're struggling with something or maybe seeking. If you go back to my own story, my beginning of the mountain was coming off a 25-year career and standing before God and saying, is this it? Right? Like, is there more? I feel like there's more, but I don't know what it is. So I was in a state of seeking and questioning and asking, but not knowing, definitely not knowing. And so that was my before. So your before, everyone's before is going to look different, but you need to find an entry point that is before you obviously have it all figured out and everything's beautiful. In the fairy tale example, the once upon a time, there's a damsel in distress, right? So we need to find your damsel in distress moment. When you start climbing a mountain, it's hard, number one. And number two, we don't exactly have the peak of the mountain in view. A lot of times you're just climbing and all you see is more trees and more mountain. Sometimes you fall down and you get your knees bloody. You get off track and you get off the trail and you get lost. But eventually, and some of that can be part of the storytelling, but not all of it, just pieces of it. But then the main thing is then when you get to the top of the mountain, this is the transformation. Think about it. When you get to the top of the mountain, you see the view. You see the view that you've been climbing towards the whole time. And when you see the view, the transformation in our own journeys is when things start to make sense. You see things more clearly. You're like, I get it now, right? In my own example, when I shared earlier about, building light beamers, I gave you lots of examples of me falling down and getting my knees bloody and getting lost in the woods. But eventually when I got to the top of the mountain, it was when, people were coming to me and saying, April, we need you to teach this. We don't know how to tell our story. We're really drowning in these pieces. And that's when all that I knew about storytelling and the way that I was showing up and sharing my story began to make sense. And I had a lot of clarity then around the next piece, which is when you get to the other side, and this is really beautiful for business storytelling. The other side is oftentimes where our brand story is born. It's when we now know what we know, and now we can go share it with others. So when you're going down the mountain, it's like you're running down the mountain. You're not struggling to go down the mountain like you are when you're climbing up. You are running down the mountain because you want to go tell all the people that are at the bottom about what you saw at the top, that view, what's that transformation that's available for them too. And you now know how to communicate what that is, right? So if you're someone who is really struggling with, like I was in the beginning, being clear about what light beamers was, being clear about my clarity, I encourage you to look back through your story. Your story is going to leave breadcrumbs and clues as to what your audience is waiting for you to tell them. And they're waiting for you to tell it to them in story form. They don't want a textbook, they want a story. So if you can use that framework, the before, the transformation, and the other side, and I've got free trainings on this. I've got that free guide on my website if you want to go download it. That'll make it easier for you to kind of workshop your way through it. Come into our community, share it with me. I'll give you feedback. But that's the simple framework that I use for everything, including being interviewed in this podcast. I shared the story from my story arc framework.
Yeah, so good. So good. So April, how do we find the download? What's your website? And also you've talked about your community. You've mentioned a number of times. Mm-hmm. How can people join your community, and where do we find you on social?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. So the website is Lightbeamers, all, just LIGHTBEAMERS. If you go to the homepage, there's a big yellow button that says download your free storytelling guide. Story formula, I think is what we call it. So go get that. That's basically what I just told you in a nutshell, but it's a worksheet. It's got some prompts in there that will kind of get you going, thinking of some questions. When you download it, there is an option. It's totally an option. And I don't know, it's like maybe $20. But there's a video series of me teaching this in a little bit more detail than what I just did. If you want that, that is an option. It will pop up automatically. So you can get that or not, doesn't matter. And then you will be invited immediately to come into our community to start practicing. We do prompts in our community every week to get you to explore more micro storytelling, as well as that big piece of your story using the story arc framework. And that's a free Facebook community called Lightbeamers Community, and it should be pretty easy to find. But if you download our free guide, you're going to get some emails that invite you into that community. And then the other free resource that I would really, if you're podcast listeners, you may enjoy another podcast. I do a lot of teaching on storytelling and visibility and speaking and writing and all the things that we help our clients with. I do a lot of training and teaching and interviewing others about that on our podcast called The Inside Story, which is another free resource that people could go and check out.
Amazing.
And yeah, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, those are my main channels, and you can find me in any of those channels at Lightbeamers. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to, learn more about some of your listeners and what they're up to in the world, and how might storytelling help them.
Yeah, so make sure that you go grab this free resource from April. It's a beautiful gift, and it's going to help you navigate your story and start putting those pieces together and join our community. Again, Lightbeamers is the website. Lightbeamers is the community. It's easy to find. So make sure you go join them. Both are free, and she's going to give you so much support inside of there. And then reach out to April. Let her know, reach out, DM her, message her. She wants to connect. She loves to connect with you and wants to learn more about you as well. So, and we have all of this information inside of our show notes as well. But again, she makes it really easy. Lightbeamers is the website, and Lightbeamers is the community. So make sure you go there, grab the resources that she has, and go connect with April. April, I want to say thank you for your time today. I have one last question for you. So you've shared a lot about your story and who you are in the business sense. So what would we not know? Would be maybe a fun fact that would surprise us about you, the lovely April?
Well, I am, I'm a very positive person. I have a positive disposition in life, and I, definitely love positivity. And I think it would surprise people to know that I also struggle. I've written a few books, and we've done collaborative books, and I've shared these stories in these books around struggles with anxiety, struggles with, feeling extremely anxious in the world. And this is something that I battle even today. I had to give myself a pep talk, like, okay, April, today we're not going to feel the weight of the world. And the reason why I've learned that I have anxiety the way I have it, and this is actually in direct conflict with my faith, because I'm a Christian, and I know that the Bible teaches that we are not to be anxious, that, if we put all our faith in God, we are not to be anxious. So I struggle. However, I feel people's energy very deeply. I'm an empath. And So the world is hard. The world is dark. It is scary. It's chaotic. And there are days that, that I just feel all of that. And when I work in the world of storytelling and I hear women's stories on a day-to-day basis, and they're not easy stories. I mean, we're all walking around with just baggage that we're lugging around. And I hear this and I see the potential in women, but I see where they are also being bogged down by their own mind and stories and experiences that they're living. And that it can be hard. There are definitely days that it's hard to release it. And I think that would surprise people because when you meet me, if you were to meet me in person or you start following me online, you're going to see me, I'm very positive, and I am. I truly am. That's how I get over the anxiety most days. Is like, okay, we're gonna shift this. We're gonna not think this way. I am gonna rely on my faith. I am going to think positive today. I'm going to, if I can have a negative thought, I can also have a positive thought. So I am kind of a oxymoron in a lot of ways that I'm always having to navigate that. And I share that because I just want that to be real. I don't want it to be something that positive, toxic positive psychology on you. It's like, yeah, I can be positive and I can also be someone who struggles.
Yeah, and I thank you for sharing that because that does surprise me that's a challenge for you. And I think it's important for people to know, like you said, entrepreneurship is hard. It's a lonely journey. It's hard, but it can be simple as long as you're given the right, you take the guidance and you seek it. Like, don't lone wolf this. And that's another thing, having anxiety or going through those challenging times where you have to lift yourself up. That's the power of community. It's a power of, if when in the online space, there is community, you don't have to do this alone. And you can surround yourself, whether it's with mentorship or community, whatever it looks like for you, but surround yourself with people that you trust. And again, you brought up trust as far as your audience trusting you. When you follow through with the commitments that you make to yourself, you're also building trust in yourself. But find people that you can trust, that you can reach out to and say, hey, you know what, I'm having a moment. Can you hold the bucket for me? Maybe you want feedback. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just need somebody to hold the bucket and you can just get it out there and then purge it. So then you can keep moving forward and you've got somebody holding you high and wrapping their arms around you virtually or in person, whatever it looks like, to support you and move through it. So no, I think that's amazing that you shared that. Thank you for that, because it's, we all have those moments where, and you shared, like, so there's days where you're like, am I going to keep doing this or do I just go get a job? Like, and of course not, but that's the rinse and repeating it and, and building that confidence up and doing the thing. But there's those days. It's like, do I have another day in me? Do I have another day in me?
Yeah.
So get community, reach out to April. She's here to support you. You have a story, you have a message. So for any of you who are saying to yourself, I don't have a story, you have multiple stories. You've got multiple stories. It's just a matter of getting in April's community, allowing her to support you and pulling those out of you and being able to provide them and share them in a really concise way and moving way, because you want to inspire and move people toward action through your story and through your journey. And also the other thing is you have a story. And for those of you who don't think you do, or don't know how to put it together, reach out to April. She's got you. And there's so
Thank
many
you so
power
much,
in
Heidi.
sharing. You're welcome. Thank you for sharing your story with us, April. Thank you for being here today. And I know we're running over, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you all for joining us today on the B-Sheep. Oh, she's also a best-selling author. We didn't even have time for that. Oh my God. I have to bring you back, April, but she's got 3 books. She's a best-selling author. What are the books called real quick so they can find you on Amazon?
Yeah, they're collaborative books. They're on Amazon and they are called Elevate Your Voice, Step into Your Brave, and Shine Your Light, which is a reflection of my ethos and belief system around what storytelling does for you.
Beautiful. We're going to drop that in the show notes too. Go check her out on Amazon, grab the books, and we'll see you on the next episode of the B-Sheep podcast. Go be seen, be heard, and empowered.